Hi, everyone. Catherine Korostoff here from Research Rockstar, and thanks for joining me for another episode of Conversations for Research Rockstars. And today we've got a really great topic. We're going to talk about what really drives brand connection. And obviously, as market research and insights professionals, many of us do work on brand. Sometimes it's studies about measuring brand awareness, brand perceptions, brand loyalty, and so on. Certainly, the construct of brand is important in many market research projects. So I'm very happy to have an expert with us today. And our guest here is Dan Breaker, who is the president and founder of Breakthrough Research. And as we'll be learning today, Dan has done a lot of really great work, and his firm is doing a lot of really interesting work applying concepts from behavioral science to understanding the role of brand. So I don't want to steal his thunder. I'll let him get to that. But I also just want to mention that, of course, Dan also has a lot of expertise in market research in general. His past leadership positions have included roles at Ipsos and LRW. And in chit-chatting with Dan and getting to know him better, he has a unique piece of background that may have, I think, helped prepare him for his leadership roles in market research, which is he had a brief experience in the world of stand-up comedy. Dan, you are a very brave person to have tried that.
Well, thank you, Catherine. I only did it for a little while, but it was very nerve-wracking when I did it. You're absolutely right about that. So please don't put any pressure on me today to be funny, but it is a little interesting trivia bit from my past.
Excellent, excellent. Well, just to get us started, before we jump into the brand authenticity topic, let's first just talk about behavioral science, behavioral economics. I feel like these terms get used a lot, but they can mean different things to different people. So can you give us a definition to start the conversation?
Yeah. People might define them in different ways, but I really think of behavioral science as just the study of human behavior. And that could come from a bunch of different disciplines, right? You might be bringing in tools or approaches from psychology, sociology, anthropology, neuroscience, but it's using different methodologies or approaches to try and understand why we do what we do and why humans behave the way that they behave. Behavioral economics, I would think, is a subset of behavioral science. It's more about economic decision making, and that's a type of human behavior. But really, as market researchers, when we talk about behavioral science or maybe behavioral economics, what we're really trying to say at the heart of it is we are using other methodologies or other approaches from other disciplines to try and help understand why people do the things that they do. So we're not just going to ask the standard survey question, how likely are you to buy this on a scale of 1 to 5? We're trying to use other approaches from academia or other approaches or philosophies to dig a little bit more deeply into human behavior to understand it.
Excellent. I really love the way you that you made those definitions, because one of the things we often talk about in our courses at Research Rockstar is that we have to be very careful about over relying on self-reported data.
Mm-hmm.
Because it can be very easy to ask superficial questions that don't really get to the information that we actually truly need.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely true. And I would say behavioral science is really a growing field in market research. For a long time, we've relied on stated data. We asked people surveys, and like I said, how likely would you be able to buy this? How likely would you be to buy this product on a scale of 1 to 5? And that's our answer. But we know that there's all sorts of other things that drive behavior and all sorts of other ways to tap into the drivers of behavior. And so companies like ours and other companies out there are really using these other disciplines to try and understand human behavior a little bit more deeply.
Excellent. I love it. Now, in your work on brand, obviously part of your emphasis is on specifically the concept of authenticity and brand authenticity. Can you tell us a little bit about how you determined that authenticity was a key concept here?
Yeah. So at Breakthrough Research, we do all kinds of market research and all different types of brands and all different types of categories. And we've developed a proprietary set of behavioral science tools that we use to measure behavior. And honestly, the authenticity one came up a little bit differently than the other ones. With the other tools that we've developed, a lot of them came up because we are aware of some sort of methodology or tool in the academic space. And we look at that and say, hey, how can we adapt this and make this more of a market research tool? How do we make it apply to business, and how do we fit it into the research that we're doing? So a lot of it comes because it's born from something we've seen in academia, or sometimes a client comes to us with a question and they say, hey, I'm trying to figure out this thing where we have this tough business problem. And we say, okay, well, let's design a tool for you. And so those are the ways we come up with our typical behavioral science tools. The authenticity one actually came up a little bit differently. It came more from a cultural observation where we do a lot of brand work, and we've just been seeing that people really have different expectations for brands than they ever have had before, right? They don't just see a brand as a product or a service that they might or might not buy anymore or use anymore. They really expect brands to be active in their communities, and they expect brands to be aligned with their own personal values. And they have these different expectations, and consumers can also be quite critical of brands if they don't live up to those expectations. So we really just had more of, in this case, that cultural observation. And we wanted to develop a tool to measure that because we feel it's something that brands want to know, right? It's becoming more important for brands. So it's something you'd want to measure. And that's where we zeroed in with authenticity. And then once we had that idea, we really tried to figure out, okay, we think this is important. How do we measure it now? What do we do about this?
Excellent. So let me just ask you two questions then. You've used the phrase tool several times. When you're saying tool, are you literally talking about some sort of data collection tool, or a research tool, or are you using tool to refer to scales that you've designed that would be used in questionnaires?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of both, honestly. So our behavioral science tools, we typically call them tools, they're designed to fit into other market research studies. So they're all kind of questions, scales, respondent interactions that will fit into they're typically quantitative, so they typically fit into quantitative surveys. And we use them in companion with some of the more traditional or explicit things. So we'll still ask in a survey, what do you think of this brand? And how likely are you to buy this product from this brand? You still need that explicit, stated, quote unquote, traditional kind of stuff. But then we build in the behavioral science stuff too, whether it's authenticity or implicit emotional responses to the brand or whatever it is. We use those kinds of tools in complement to the more stated stuff.
So when you are adding your questions that you've optimized, obviously, and validated to get at some of these things in a questionnaire that's also capturing the traditional, kind of conventional things like to measure brand loyalty or, higher level measures of brand perception, do you then look to see from, any given data set? Yes, we see that, in fact, perception of brand authenticity was in fact correlated to overall brand loyalty or brand favorability.
Yeah, exactly. And so where we're at with authenticity is we recently ran a pilot study, and we just recently launched it, and it's in our first sets of client studies right now. So it's still evolving a little bit, but the pilot study that we did, we did find that authenticity did correlate pretty highly with things like brand appeal, brand recommendation, brand loyalty. But it's not exactly a one-to-one, right? Authenticity can help drive consumer connection. So if you're connected to a brand, you are more likely to recommend it. You are more likely to like it in most cases. But there are certain brands where that's not always the case. So for example, in our pilot study, we had a lot of technology brands in there. So brands like Google and Microsoft and even Amazon, which is kind of technology, kind of retail, but those technology driven brands. And by and large, consumers did not find those brands to be authentic. At the same time, they do have very high usage interest or high purchase interest for those brands because they are just so integral to our lives, right? They provide a service or provide access to something that we can't easily get somewhere else. So for a lot of brands, if you're authentic, that loyalty and that interest is there. Some brands are able to achieve it without necessarily having the authenticity that the other brands achieve. We saw that in the energy field too, right? We measured a lot of energy brands, and those were not seen as highly authentic, but we need that to drive our cars and heat our homes and all those kinds of things. And so for those brands, there's still a high usage interest, even though the authenticity is not as strong.
It's interesting that you share that. I know I used to do a lot of customer loyalty and customer satisfaction research, and I've always been careful to define loyalty and satisfaction because they're not exactly the same thing. And what I would often find was that there were brands that I was working with that had enormous loyalty but low satisfaction. And people would be flummoxed, like, how can that be? But it was because these were just big brands that were, they had such power in the marketplace that it was hard not to say, it's hard not to buy from them. But there are a lot of brands that don't have that luxury.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I would say is, even for those brands that are able to achieve consumer interest without authenticity, I think authenticity is still important for them, right? Like, you'll see with a lot of the energy companies, a lot of them are trying to move towards greener forms of energy, right? And they're trying to build up their brand equity through those efforts and through those messages to consumers. And those kinds of messages will really land if a consumer feels you're authentic, right? If an energy company is saying, hey, we're trying to be green and we're trying to move the needle with consumers on green energy, that's only going to land if the consumers feel that you're an authentic brand and they believe that message. So some brands are able to achieve strong usage interest or purchase interest without that authenticity. But as I was saying, even for those brands, I think authenticity is an important factor they should keep an eye on.
I totally appreciate what you're saying. So what about market segments or customer groups? Do you find that authenticity is more important to some market segments than others?
That is a very interesting question too. And I would say we're still figuring that out. In our original pilot study, one of the things that we were really interested in was in generation, because we had this hypothesis going in that, younger people today might feel authenticity is more important to them for brands that they want to interact with or purchase. And so we were looking at some of the data by generation. And one of the interesting things that we found was Gen Z actually had lower authenticity for a lot of the brands. And what our hypothesis there is that there's actually a higher bar that you have to reach with Gen Z today than with older generations. They are judging you more harshly for authenticity. But we're still learning it, right? Like, this is a new measure that we've just brought to the market, and we're going to be looking at it across different client studies and different categories. But, that was one really interesting finding that we weren't quite expecting.
I love that point. And I like that you've broken it out, that there's like sort of two aspects there. There's the aspect of, for specific market segments, is authenticity important? And then by different market segments, is the bar higher or lower to be considered authentic?
Yeah. One of the other market subgroups we looked at in our pilot study is we also looked at political affiliation. And that had some really interesting results in terms of which brands people thought were authentic. So, for example, Chick-fil-A among Republicans is considered a highly, highly authentic brand. I think it was one of the top brands for authenticity in our pilot study among Republicans. But for Democrats, it actually scored quite low for authenticity. So, that was just one example. There were a few others as well, but just kind of showed our own personal belief systems as well can impact how we connect with brands and how we perceive brands.
I have to ask you, was your decision to look at political affiliation inspired by the related Pew Research study on political affiliation as a predictor of consumer behavior?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. I'll have to check that out. I actually haven't seen that yet. I know Pew does a lot of really great work, but I haven't seen that specific study. But we did have a hypothesis going in that political affiliation would have a lot of impact. And we did in our pilot study. It was mainly on brands, but we tested authenticity of a few people as well. We had some celebrities and athletes and politicians in there as well. And we did find some really interesting results there. Like, for example, Elon Musk his authenticity really is driven by your political affiliation. Again, Republicans find him to be a very, very highly authentic person, and Democrats do not. They have the opposite impression. So, there were some really interesting findings there.
Excellent. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. So I guess just one last question for you then is, a lot of the people who are part of our community here at Research Rockstar who'd be seeing this are market researchers who either have internal clients, because some of our community are people who work on the insights teams at big brands, others work at market research agencies. Yep. Whether they're working with internal or external clients, if they wanted to broach the subject of, hey, we should be looking at authenticity, do you have any suggestions for how they can bring this concept and its potential value to their clients?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, with us launching this methodology, the main thing that we're putting out there is that just brands should be thinking about this, right? You shouldn't just be thinking, are people buying my product or not? Are people intending to buy my product or not? Consumers are looking to have these deeper connections with brands today than they ever have in the past. And so that's, I think, the first step. Just think about your authenticity. Think, are people perceiving us to be authentic? If we are sending certain messages out there to consumers, do we have the authenticity to carry those messages? Will our messages be seen as valid because people think our brand is operating in an authentic way? So I think that's the first step. I think secondly, once you have that mindset, you can build it into your research, right? And we have our proprietary approach that we've built to measure authenticity. So if anyone wants to contact us for how you can implement that into your research, we'd be happy to talk to them. But even if you're doing your own research, if you're doing focus groups or qualitative interviews with people, you can talk to them about how they perceive the brand, and do you think the brand is authentic or not? And do you find our messages to be believable because of the way you perceive us? There's different ways you can bridge it in if you're not working with us, for example.
No, thank you. I appreciate that. And I will use that as a segue to say thank you so much for sharing your knowledge. And we'll certainly put your company information in the show notes. Is there anything else people should know about contacting you? I believe you also have an interesting download available on your website, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you can access the report from our pilot study for authenticity. There's a link there. It's in our LinkedIn if you want to access that. But then you can also contact us if you want to access the report or ask any questions about authenticity. And yeah, please do feel free to share my contact info.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Dan. I really appreciate that. And for those of you who are current Research Rockstar students, I just want to remind you that we do have a course on behavioral economics in the training portal that has a lot of really good reference material. Even if you don't want to do the whole course, I definitely encourage you to check out some of the different job aids. I've got a little screenshot of one of them right here, just to make sure that you're kind of current on some of the key information, key definitions, and concepts that we can leverage as market researchers from the world of behavioral economics. And also with that, just so you know, in addition to the job aids in that course, there are also some recorded video lessons that really go into some of the concepts, not authenticity specifically, but do go into some of the concepts that Dan has kind of referred to indirectly about, we really want to make sure we get past the superficial understanding of how people think and how they behave with brands to really get to peel the onion and really understand how people make decisions about who they're going to buy from, what companies they're going to do business with. And for those of you who are new to the Conversations for Research Rockstar series, this is a video podcast available on YouTube. And we also have audio-only versions available on all of your favorite podcasting platforms. And as always, we truly appreciate if you would subscribe or give us reviews. It helps us to get found in the YouTube universe. Thanks. Thanks again, Dan. I appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Catherine. It was great to be here.